Hi, everyone. Hope you are well. Welcome to another edition of Network TechTalk. My name is Derek Johnston. I'm your host today. And in this episode, we are discussing fixed wireless access, or FWA, and its role in bridging the digital divide. Specifically, we're going to dive into the state of broadband in the U.S., what's the federal government's role in addressing the broadband gaps, as well as what fixed wireless technologies are available to close the digital divide. Now, broadband access has been a challenge in the U.S. It's been a discussion for years, spanning the difficulties in covering rural areas to remote locations, as well as urban dead zones. There are various estimates of the size and scope of this, of the divide, but one estimate from the FCC has identified roughly 21 million people who don't have connectivity. And while that's primarily focused in rural communities and remote locations, it also includes some 2% of folks living in cities. So to unpack this challenge and provide insights into the state of the government investment policy as well as technologies that can help close the gap, I am joined by a couple of my esteemed colleagues, John Godfrey, who is Senior Vice President of our Public Policy at Samsung Electronics America, and Aditya Nayak, who leads Technology and Business Development in the space for Samsung's Networks business. Hi, gentlemen. Welcome. How are you?
Doing great. Hi, Derek.
Good. How you doing?
Excellent. Thanks for being here today. So I'm excited about today's discussion, but before we kick it off, I just wanted to let our viewers know that if they're looking for more information on today's topic, we've got a link to website, YouTube at the bottom of the screen. So let's just get started with getting grounded in kind of the challenge itself. What is the digital divide? It's a common term that has been thrown out there, but John, you want to provide us a little perspective on that?
Sure. Thanks, Derek. It's really about making sure that all Americans, or, there's a worldwide digital divide as well, but we're talking about America today, that everyone has access to broadband. And as we are hopefully emerging from pandemic shutdowns and hopefully not going back into them any time in the near future, we've all had a crash course in how important broadband is. It was always important for people to have access, but for during the pandemic, we all learned how to work remotely, to go to school, to see the doctor, to shop, to socialize with friends and family, and and hold panel discussions like we're doing right now. Remotely, but you can't do that, and you're excluded from that if you don't have adequate broadband. You cited some data a minute ago, Derek. I would add also, another interesting data point from the U.S. Census Bureau. The American Community Survey found in 2019 that nearly 36 million American households did not subscribe to a broadband internet service. So that's a big chunk of the population. A lot of those people probably have a phone, or they have maybe a cell phone, but they don't have broadband. They don't have adequate broadband where they live. And it may be that they can't afford the cost, or they're not interested. That's definitely part of the explanation. But for a whole lot of Americans, especially in rural areas, it's a matter of not actually having any access because there isn't any high-speed internet available to choose at the place where they live. And so for these people, there's, especially in rural areas where broadband isn't widely deployed, people are at a great disadvantage. And that disadvantage is going to continue even as we emerge from the pandemic, because I think we're going to be in hybrid work, hybrid school, hybrid services for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, you point out lots of valid points here. But in terms of the overall, broadband service is as we know, served by private enterprise, right? And so to that extent, what is the state, I guess, of the government assistance in terms of trying to close that gap? Because again, it's been something that they've been working on for years, but now we've got kind of there's a bunch of new series of investments, right, that has been brought to bear to try and close the gap.
Yeah, you're right, Derek. It's mostly private investment that provides telecom services and internet services in this country and in a lot of the world, and that is great. But that means that the investors who deploy have to be able to get a return on their investment. And if you are looking at areas that are really expensive to serve, like rural areas where you have to run communication links over a long distance, and you don't get to recover your investment by collecting subscription fees from very many people because the population is low density. So there are places that are just not really economical to serve. And so the government is trying to step in and help solve this problem. And Congress acted last year with a bipartisan infrastructure law, dealt with roads and bridges and railroads and ports and other kinds of infrastructure, but also the broadband infrastructure. And the ambition of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act is to close the digital divide once and for all. It includes $42.5 billion with a B in grants from the Department of Commerce to the states. And then the states will hand that out for broadband projects for locations that are unserved or underserved by broadband. The name of the program is Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, BEAD, or just the BEAD program. And the BEAD program is up and running now. The Commerce Department published the rules for the grants in May of 2022. The states are now working on their proposals. And when they submit them to the Commerce Department and the plans are approved, then at that point, Commerce will hand over the money to the states to then distribute to generally to private enterprises, but it could be some quasi-public entities too, to go out and deploy broadband. Now, there is a gating factor. The Federal Communications Commission is still updating maps that show which specific places are unserved or underserved. And the grant program will not fully begin until those maps are complete. The FCC is actually releasing the draft maps right about now, and they are based on self-reporting from internet service providers. So the FCC is publishing them and then collecting feedback to correct mistakes and errors and gaps in the maps. And once that is done, then that will guide the estimate of what places are unserved and what places are underserved, which the money can go to. And the Department of Commerce has said they will, they will wait for those maps to be finalized, but they're not going to wait forever. Their expectation is that people are going to refine and complete those maps with the FCC early in 2023. And then the Commerce Department's going to calculate how much of that $42.5 billion will go to each state. It's not being allocated by population, by total population of states. It's being allocated by how much unserved and underserved areas are in the states. So that's why these maps are so important. And the Commerce Department has set their deadline of June 30th, 2023. That is when they are planning, no later than then, to allocate the funds to the states to tell them how much is available for each state. And then at that point, the states will know what they're bidding for and what their proposals are going to be aiming at.
So, they made the funds available. The process is starting to roll. Looks like there's a couple of gating factors, but I guess in terms of as service providers are starting to look at, or have been assessing, where they may deploy, et cetera, can you give us a sense of kind of what constitutes a broadband connection? Meaning, what's the kind of minimum level of requirements that need to be provided, kind of to qualify for these programs or to provide these communities with access?
Yeah, that's right. When Congress was developing this program and planning to close the digital divide, there was a lot of debate about what broadband should be. Congress wanted to make sure that the digital divide would be closed with meaningful broadband, with something that's fast enough and low enough in latency to allow people to participate in the economy and school and all the things that we have come to expect. But Congress did not want to pick specific technologies and preclude business models or innovations. And so Congress did not define the technology. Congress set a performance baseline. And the specific baseline, there is a number. It's 100 megabits per second downstream and 20 megabits per second upstream, which we think is really appropriate because the vast majority of usage of broadband is asymmetrical. Most people are consuming a lot more data than they are producing. Even in video conferencing, you're receiving a bunch of video streams and you're only sending one video stream. So asymmetric is the right answer. And these are ambitious speeds. I mean, 100 megabits per second down and 20 megabits per up that's good broadband. And it can be met with fiber to the home, and a huge amount of fiber is going to be deployed under this program. But, it's very expensive to lay fiber to individual homes. It's expensive to lay any kind of wire to individual homes. And if the homes are spread very far apart, like in a rural area, the return on investment may not add up for deploying fiber all the way to the house. And that is where fixed wireless access, which is jumping over that last gap to the house with wireless technology, can really shine because you can cover a large area at lower cost. And fixed wireless access is going to be an important part of the solution, especially in rural areas. And then, Derek, I also just want to elaborate a little bit on another difference between wireless and wireline fiber to your home, because wireless can do something that fiber cannot do, and that is move around. Wireless can support mobile users. If you take your broadband outside your house, and maybe you're a farmer driving a tractor out in your back cropland, or maybe you're a kid on a school bus doing your homework at the last minute with internet access as the bus is going to school, or you're at a soccer game and you've got some downtime and you're going to do your homework there. Then those are places that wireless can step in. And there's been a lot of discussion in Washington, D.C., where I work, around making sure that this $42.5 billion investment is future-proof, so we don't have to do it again in a few years. And that's smart. That's a good policy. If we're going to spend this money, let's make sure people get fast enough speed that it's going to last. But I would also add that the future is going to be not just fast, but also mobile. And people are going to be using their phones and tablets and PCs wherever they are, including in their car. And in fact, the car itself will be connected to the internet. And a fixed wireless access deployment can easily evolve to support mobile users. And so at least in that way, fixed wireless is actually more future-proof than fiber. So I just hope people won't forget about the role of wireless in future-proofing the country's broadband investment.
That's a great point. And so I just want to pull you in here because I know you've been engaged with a variety of service providers that have actually been deploying, FWA and leveraging some of the earlier programs. John alluded to a few like the BEAD and IIJL, but RDOF is out there, and so I know you've been intimately involved in some of these things. So can you say fixed wireless access has been around for years, right? The technology's been around for years, but now all of a sudden it's at the forefront of this discussion. Like what's different today? What are the solutions to help that are out there that are going to help close this broadband gap?
So let's talk about the what is fixed wireless, right? So and why it is the right solution. So It's largely a story of two parts, right? So you have two parts of the radio spectrum. There's one millimeter wave spectrum and then the mid-band spectrum, right? Samsung is helping network operators today in both places. So millimeter wave in US, for example, means the 28 gigahertz, the 37 to 40 gigahertz, and above, right? This spectrum has a huge capacity for very wide channels and very high data rates in gigabits per second. But millimeter wave signals do not propagate as far as the lower frequency signals. So it's primarily being used for urban and suburban solution, right? But that doesn't mean that it's irrelevant to the digital divide. There are, in fact, more urban than rural households that lacks broadband today. Millimeter wave fixed wireless access can bring more competitive choices and innovations for higher speed, low latency broadband that will put broadband within the reach for more people, including urban areas. In fact, the world's first commercial 5G network, Verizon's 5G Home, was and still remains a fixed wireless service. It was launched in 2018 in Samsung's equipment, with Samsung's equipment in the first 5G city, Sacramento, California. Meanwhile, we continue to push the boundaries, setting up speed records for millimeter wave fixed wireless earlier this year in partnership with Qualcomm. We've worked together to break 5G speeds, record in lab tests reaching 8.08 gigabits for downloads and 711 megabits per second for uploads. These data rates are in line with what fiber currently delivers. Rural broadband often has to cover longer distances, and that is where mid-band spectrum comes in, right? So mid-band spectrum propagates farther, but it does not have this as much as of a capacity as a millimeter wave. But you can still achieve the data rate that the Commerce Department grant program will require. So as John mentioned earlier, that requires about 100 Mbps in the downstream and 20 Mbps in the upstream. Right? So last year, FCC auctioned for C-band. It raised more than about $80 billion and awarded licenses nationwide. Services has been launched at 3.7 to 3.9 gigahertz, including with the Samsung's C-band equipment in Verizon's network, supporting both mobile as well as fixed users. Before the C-band auction, the FCC also allocated the adjacent spectrum, which is from 3.5 to 3.7 band, which is the CBRS, also called as Citizens Broadband Radio Service, with a flexible mix of GAA and priority license, right? So GAA means general access. So CBRS is specifically a good solution for rural broadband because with the low density of users, it may be feasible to deliver services with general access license, which does not cost anything to the operators. They are simply issued dynamically with any conflicts resolved by the database, which is a SAS in this case. In rural areas, conflicts may be rare, and general access CBRS might be the right solution.
So in terms of, and that was super helpful in terms of defining kind of what the solutions are in the spectrum categories. But how, can you give us a sense too of how this is kind of coming together in terms of network technology providers like Samsung, and how are they helping operators and WISPs deploy FWA today?
So Samsung provides a complete solution for fixed wireless. Our millimeter wave compact macro is small and a light product which can be installed on street lamps, on utility poles. It uses massive MIMO and beamforming technology to increase coverage and signal strength. Beamforming is a process of shaping radio signals from multiple antenna elements into focused physical beams to target specific devices. This can improve the signal strength and distance greatly. In mid-band, our 5G-ready CBRS, recently certified by the OnGo Alliance, offers three-dimensional beamforming technologies supporting both 4G and 5G operations. Apart from the RAN, our compact core enables swift deployments and efficient operations of new network infrastructure into rural areas. Samsung has a variety of partners to help bring these solutions to market.
Yeah, so with it, I guess to your last point there, in terms of, and obviously in the networks business, there are many ecosystem members out there in terms of design, deployment, management of this networks. Do you have, just from your own experience in terms of the field, do you have examples of other operators, integrators, or other partners that you're working with to bring these fixed wireless access networks to these communities?
Absolutely. So with Samsung, we're constantly trying to bring in new partners that could help us advance our deployments, right? So till date, we have about 3 different partners. I'd like to talk a little bit about these individual partners, right? So Mediacom is one of the customers out there. So Mediacom Communication, one of the largest cable operators in US, is helping with the deployments of CBRS wireless networks in hard-to-reach rural communities across the US. This will greatly widen the reach for its high-speed network services to underserved or remote areas of the county through fixed wireless access. Then the other partner that we've onboarded, which is Amdocs, it provides mobile broadband connectivity with fixed wireless access services using the CBRS spectrum. While together we will bring in 5G-ready CBRS solutions to key industries, including education, utilities, manufacturing, logistics, transportation, and retail. We will also provide organizations such as higher education institutions and factories a way to unlock full value of private 4G networks for the next generation use case and leverage CBRS in hard-to-reach locations as well, right? Lastly, we have also onboarded T3 Broadband, a partner. So Samsung and T3 Broadband, our partners, announced that we are providing CBRS fixed wireless network to Mercury Broadband for deployment across the rural markets in the Midwest, starting with more than 500 sites in states of Kansas, Missouri, Indiana, etc., before expanding to additional states through 2025.
Excellent. In addition, I guess to that extent, some of the examples you provided, clearly there's a bit of differentiation in terms of the geographies they're covering. But the last one you mentioned, is that particularly those are in rural communities? Was there usage in terms of any of the funding mechanisms, et cetera, or some of these things still again privately funded versus operating under investment?
Absolutely. So it's a mix of both. So Mercury Broadband, the last example that I gave you, did when RDOF was awarded the RDOF funding, but they are also looking at private investors to get in funding, which will help them grow their network. Right. So yes, to answer your question, yes, they are receiving funding from both RDOF as well as private investors.
Derek, Aditya just mentioned the RDOF program, and maybe it would be helpful just to explain a little more about what that is. That's an FCC program, the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund, which is several years old, which was very similar to the BEAD program, designed to deploy high-speed broadband in rural areas. And they conducted an auction process and made grants much smaller than the BEAD program, under $10 billion. But they've already gotten a start on closing the digital divide in a lot of rural areas. So the BEAD program is going to take that even further and kind of finish the job. And the FCC may step back for a little while and let the BEAD program finish, and then we expect that the FCC may come forward with maybe a round that's more focused on 5G and mobile. So stay tuned.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. This has been super informative. So thank you, Aditya. Thank you, John. Really appreciate your guys' time and your insights today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Derek.
Thank you all for joining us today on Network Tech Talks. Stay tuned for more upcoming episodes and for more insights and engagement on industry topics. Please follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.